One of my favorite expressions in life is stick to the main line. From what I learned many years ago, it was something said by one of the early great musicians of jazz, King Oliver, during the 1920s. He said it to one of the members of his band, someone who happened to be a great prodigy and was becoming famous for his amazing solos. Now, Oliver didn't want this musician to stop doing great things or great solos, but he wanted to remind him of what mattered in a song. And for him, it was the rhythm and the melody. It was like, stick to the main line, kid, is what he supposedly told a young Louis Armstrong. Now, I don't really know how true that story is, but I think it's great advice for a lot of things. You remember what's important. Remember the fundamentals. Don't get cute. Don't make it about yourself. It's good advice for staying grounded in any endeavor you can think about. And speaking of the word grounded, a lot of people like to use that word, grounded. I've been studying UFOs for over 25 years now, and I still often hear people telling me that I'm grounded. I know they mean it as a compliment, and that's nice. But when I hear it, there's always a little bit of a jolt that goes along with it. There's this unspoken assumption that many people in the UFO field are not grounded. Well, for me, being grounded simply means one thing, and one thing only: following the evidence. Evidence is the main line, so to speak, in ufology. You stick to the main line by following the evidence. I didn't start studying ufology or UFOs back in the 1990s because I was fascinated by the personalities in the field or by their arguments with each other. No. What prompted me to dive in and never leave these waters was something else. It was the phenomenon itself. The fact that there was and is a large data set, a body of evidence that sure seemed extraordinary and didn't have a good explanation. At least some cases, some really good cases. In other words, I was drawn into the evidence, and I was drawn into the fact that there was something really interesting going on, and I wanted to understand it. I was curious, and this was a puzzle. So when you explore and investigate any field, you are trying to find out what is true. And if you're not trying to find out what is true, then you're not only wasting your own time, but you're wasting the time of those around you, to the extent that you're using up any of the oxygen in the room and drawing attention to whatever it is you're doing. If you're not engaged in trying to know what is true, then by all means, get out of the room. Do it on your own time, because learning what is true is hard enough for the rest of us. And we don't need anyone around who's not trying to do that. What I mean by this is that when we are engaged in trying to understand what is true, we are obliged to ask ourselves again and again, what constitutes good evidence, and how do we arrive at a decision or judgment about that evidence? These are questions of epistemology, which are questions of how do we know what we know? It's our theory of knowledge. And these are very important questions in any field, certainly that of UFOs. And you don't hear too much being said about it, unfortunately, but that doesn't make it unimportant. In science, as opposed to spiritual revelation, for example, knowledge is considered provisional. Scientists don't always act like that because they're human beings after all, but science itself, yes, knowledge is provisional. Hypotheses are provisional. They can be changed when new information and new evidence comes along to allow for new hypotheses to explain things a little bit better. So the best way, in my view, of acquiring knowledge is by careful, empirical observation and analysis. That is, you study reality, things that are happening in the world around you. You record, you analyze, you let others critique your work. In that way, you get a little bit closer to an accurate portrayal of actual reality. That is the truth. Now, spiritual revelation has a certain emotional power that the scientific method doesn't have. In spiritual revelation, you're getting an insight from God or some spiritual realm that isn't available to revision. It's eternal, so to speak. It's not open to argumentation. It's not available to independent analysis. There are people who really want that. They want that certainty. right? This is a very widespread phenomenon within the UFO community among certain people. And many of them are lecturers at conferences, and they have popular websites. They arrive at their message by subjective means known only to themselves. They are special. They have revelations and special knowledge that were given to them, which makes them the conduit by which other people can learn those truths. Basically, it's spiritual revelation. And there is so much of this in the UFO field that you cannot avoid it if you try. And there's a related kind of person in this field, often which overlaps the spiritual messiah type of person. Not always, but usually to some degree, yes. And this is the person who's claimed to have participated in a secret program, was taken to exotic places, learned exotic sciences, and so on. That's essentially another form of revelation, the claim to special knowledge, esoteric knowledge, and they are then the indispensable link in the chain of truth. Now, it's not that this can't ever be true. Individual cases can be true, or at least they can have elements of truth in them. The thing is, though, they have to be tested. They need to be studied and critiqued. They need to be amenable to outside independent research and confirmation. And if they are not, well, that's definitely a big mark against them, especially when those types of claims start taking on messianic dimensions, when it becomes about the person more than any independent, usable piece of information. So clearly you can tell I'm not a fan of these kinds of discourse in the field. And the main reason, seems to me, is the sheer arrogance behind it. You don't often hear people commenting on this element of it, but to me, it's the most glaring aspect of it. Think about this. Anytime someone puts themselves in the position of being the indispensable conduit of revealed truth, they are putting themselves above you. They're saying, I'm special, I have special knowledge, but I'm going to reveal that knowledge to you, lucky you. I think teaching and learning should never be that way. Any teacher worth anything at all, any researcher worth anything, will always show you how he or she got there. They will give you footnotes and citations galore. They will give you the opportunity to look at all the evidence that they looked at in formulating their research. You have the chance to critique them. And here's another thing that's important about this. In theory, any good work of research that anyone does could just as easily have been done by you, had you gone through the trouble to find and study the sources and gone through the process that they did. A good researcher who works like that is not above you. You and they are at the same level. There's equality there. Even if they did the work, you didn't do the work, because fundamentally there's nothing that they did in theory that you could not have done, and because they show you their work. That's good research. That's a researcher not putting themselves above you. Now, to me, this is such an important concept, and it amazes me that it is so pushed to the side in so much of ufology. So yes, there's a very distinctly unpleasant arrogance to anyone who professes to educate you on their special or secret knowledge. And it only gets worse when they go a step further and try to provide spiritual wisdom and life guidance and so on, aside from being incredibly cringe-inducing and a complete embarrassment to the rest of us. I mention all this because sadly, ufology has long ago been poisoned by the influx of this kind of thinking. A lot of it, not all, but a lot of it comes from that poison known as New Age thinking. And without a doubt, it is one of the worst inhibitors of effective thinking that you can find anywhere. And to the extent that it's moved into ufology, it has left a trail of intellectual destruction. More than once, right before my own very eyes, I have seen that type of ideology completely shut down critical thinking and any shred of common sense. And I've thought about this a lot, and I realize there's a couple of reasons for this, it seems to me. One reason is that ideologies like New Age ideology are not evidence-based. And frankly, they often disdain evidence-based thinking. So adherents to this type of ideology often get out of the habit of even thinking along the lines of looking for evidence to support a claim. You know, there are people in the UFO community, I feel like they should just create the hashtag believe the storyteller, because that's where some of them are. And in my observation, by far, the greatest demographic of these types of people are in the New Age spectrum of ideology. Now, another problem with this ideology, it's every bit as pernicious, is this frequent emphasis on the relativity of truth. And you hear this in different ways. Some of us, we're told, are more intuitive than others. So the less intuitive can't be expected to understand what the more intuitive are getting. So if you've circulated around the field, you know that people actually talk like this. And always, always, they're going to talk to you about your truth and my truth. And what's true for you may not be true for me. Aside from the obvious fact that this kind of approach to truth will make it impossible for you to properly investigate anything, I mean, literally anything, it's actually a really dangerous way to live your life. And people think it's awesome because it sounds tolerant. It sounds the opposite of egotistical, too. I mean, after all, you're saying to the other person, in effect, that your understanding of reality is every bit as valid and relevant as mine. For you, it's, you know, what is real. I mean, it seems grand and generous, except that it's actually yet more arrogance. It's arrogant. This time, the arrogance is directed against reality itself, which, don't forget, reality is always our greatest teacher. It's arrogant because it assumes that we can just actually and literally create our reality. And this is so widespread, it's a catchphrase, create your reality. Well, I suppose we need to define our terms here. Your ideas about yourself and the world can definitely influence the way you live your life. So yes, your ideas matter. They certainly do. They can be helpful and they can be destructive to you and to other people. But when you start to think that reality itself can be genuinely created or manifested by your own hopes and ideas, then I would submit that you are engaging in a really dangerous arrogance. You are attributing to yourself powers and capabilities and wisdom, which you don't have, because eventually reality is going to come crashing through. This subjectivity of reality, what's true for you is different than what's true for me, and that kind of thing, it's dangerous also because it moves us away from a society based on merit to one based on no standards at all. It puts all ideas and all research at the same level, having nothing to do with how much quality went into research or thinking or anything like that. Would you hire someone to install a new electrical system in your house on that kind of philosophy? You know, like, hey, whatever your truth about electricity and wiring is, that's cool. No, I don't think you would. You would expect standards, because electrical systems don't care about your entirely subjective opinions. They either work or they don't work based on entirely on certain scientific and engineering principles. In other words, there's a truth there. So making truth subjective is one of the most dangerous intellectual currents of our time. Don't participate in it. Truth can be hard to learn. Truth can certainly be complex. But truth is real. It exists. And your job, not just as someone interested in solving a good mystery, but for you to get in on a healthy way of your life, is to know this fact. It's a recognition that your great instructor isn't your own ideological persuasion. It isn't your own mind. It's reality itself. Reality is your teacher. Humble yourself before reality. That is, live your life based on evidence of what is true. Now, in this context, it's no surprise that the UFO field has attracted so many genuine narcissists and sociopathic people. And I'm not just talking about people who follow along. Yes, that's there. I'm talking about some of the biggest names connected to ufology. And no, I'm not going to name names, so don't ask. I'm not going to do that. But stating the fact of the prevalence of so many narcissists on the speaking lecture circuit, and who have very, very popular websites and all of that within this field. That's nothing outlandish. It's been widely understood for many, many years, and it's been widely observed. And it's not just some of the big names either. It is so widespread. This is measurably worse, by the way, in events that are more strongly New Age, love, and light in their orientation, in my observation anyway. And I think there's a reason for this. These disreputable people know how to feed on something. They feed on people's hope that the big problems of this world can be fixed. Spiritual problems can be fixed. The problem of living under the rule of a tiny global cabal, that can be fixed. The problem of living within a fossil fuel energy system, that can be fixed. You can have access to free energy. Utopia can be achieved, and you can help bring it about if you only follow the teachings and research of this person or that person. This is a belief set that appeals to narcissists. They circle around it like the predators that they are. They feed on this because they get to become saviors, like literally saviors. It happens because so many people in our society have been weaned away from being empirical, away from examining evidence, away from having reality as their instructor. And instead, they've gone into the entirely subjective world of their truth. But what they've actually done is they've abdicated their critical thinking skills. And it's not that there isn't injustice in this world. And it's not that we can't work to make this world at least a little bit better than when we came into it. All right, we can do that. But to think that we've got it all figured out, that we've figured out such an incredibly complex, intertwined phenomenon as human civilization, well, there are a few things more arrogant than that. And when someone comes along with supposedly divine revelations or secret insights about that, better be very careful. Because most likely you're feeding exactly into the strategy of a narcissistic, and in some cases, sociopathic user of people. They've learned your language, and they know just how to manipulate you. Well, the good news is that in UFO research, as in any field, there's always the main line. It's called the data. It's called the evidence. It's about being empirical. You test your ideas based on the evidence. And the great thing about being empirical is that you don't have to make it about yourself. It's not about you. It's the opposite of being arrogant. You become humbled by reality. Reality decides what is true, not your subjective, untestable, unfalsifiable ideas. Well, I don't really expect things are going to change all that much. I don't expect that our community or this wider culture is going to experience some kind of rebirth in critical thinking or evidence-based analysis. It's not just that ufology has become mired in ideological as opposed to evidence-based thinking. That has happened, that's true, but it's our entire society. In the space of just one generation, intellectual standards, from my perspective, have fallen dramatically right before my eyes. People are concerned about their truth, often to the exclusion of anything else. It seems to me that fewer and fewer people are interested in being challenged by opposing points of view, because if you're ever going to persist in your search for truth, you have to let other people challenge you. You have to realize that other people also have arguments and evidence. And that's becoming a little bit harder to find in our world today, not easier. But here's the thing. I don't know if it's going to get better or worse, but we don't have to add to the problem. All right. By not being intensely ideological, by being willing to test ideas with evidence, by demanding evidence, by analyzing and studying that evidence, by recognizing that truth isn't just your truth or my truth. It is what is real. You can learn it. You can communicate it. You can continue to correct what you have learned when new information and evidence comes your way. That's how we grow. So don't be a sucker for utopian claims that are going to fix the world and bring you enlightenment, especially from someone positioning themselves as a spiritual teacher or guru. They're using you. And when one of those people gets knocked down, which sometimes happens, there's always dozens more who are ready to take their place, because the intellectual environment is so degraded that they swarm around like flies to garbage. Demand evidence. Stick to the main line. I have one quick announcement before I say goodbye to you here, and that is that I'm really excited to announce something new for my website at richarddolanmembers.com, and this is a forum. Anyone who's a member of the site can contribute. They can have access to a wealth of information on the full array of subjects related to UFOs. This was a long time coming. Tracy and I have been working on this for the longest time, and we finally were able to get some amazing people to help us make it a reality. And this is going to go live on Wednesday, September 4th. There's a lot I can say about this, but I'm just going to mention here that it promises to be a unique environment for people who care about real research and who want to engage in it in a civil environment. So that's something to look forward to. I want to thank you for being here with me. If you want to support my work, please consider liking this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, get notifications. At least in theory, you won't miss a new show. I'm not sure how that really works out in progress in reality, but you can give it a try. And as I was just mentioning, my website, Richard Dolan Members, please consider visiting that if you want to see everything else that I'm up to. Thanks for being here. Take care.